Hello again. It seems like I'm turning into the terminology guy, but I just came on here because I noticed we started talking about risk on and risk off with all the fluctuations in the market. And I want to talk about those definitions and why they really don't matter. Um, a risk on doesn't mean how risky an asset is, and risk off doesn't mean how safe an asset is. It really just means how investors behave. So risk on is assets that people buy when it seems to them like they can take more risk. It doesn't necessarily mean that those assets are more risky. And then risk off is assets people buy when things they want to flight to safety. So I think a lot of these assets, especially like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and stocks and bonds and treasuries, they get labeled certain things because of typically how the market has behaved in the past. Um, I don't think that makes them inherently risk on or risk off. Same thing as how a lot of people like to play around with the words intrinsic and value and say that some things have intrinsic value and some things don't. Um, Intrinsic means the item has value in and to itself, and that's not possible for any item. All value is derived from the user, so there is no intrinsic value. Um, so anytime somebody tries to tell you that like a commodity or something has an intrinsic value, it doesn't. Uh, there's just no such thing. Now, the definition states what it thinks it is and that things have properties. Those properties don't exist without people. The definition of those properties doesn't exist without people. The definition of the word that describes those properties doesn't exist without people. So all value comes from uh, value systems, and it only comes from people and language. So it nothing can have intrinsic value, just like nothing is really a risk on or risk off asset if it isn't ascribed to people treating it as such. So a risk on asset might be something that you take on risk or debt, basically margin trading, where you're taking more risk on yourself in order to get more of the thing. That could be considered risk on asset. So Bitcoin is simultaneously a risk on and risk off asset, meaning uh, people sell it when they're scared and they buy it when they're confident. But then there's a whole other group of people that buy it when other people are scared and uh, actually don't stop buying it even when people are confident. And there's people that do the opposite. They trade and they try to buy when people are scared and sell when people are confident. But any way you look at it, there's really no sense in talking about things as risk on or risk off assets. I think it's just propaganda by um, basically our economic system in order to herd people into groups and ways of thinking. There's no such thing as a risk on or risk off asset, just like there's no such thing as intrinsic value. Um, and I think it's just important to keep in mind when you're listening to people say certain words, you have to think, do they know the actual definition? Do they agree with the actual definition? Are they using it according to that definition? And are they communicating something else using that word? Like, are they saying people are going risk off, meaning they are buying gold? But to me, gold is risky because they can lie about it. It's been rehypothecated, meaning there's paper gold everywhere. You can't really own a large amount of it without it being held or risk of losing it. So risk on, risk off has nothing to do with how risky something is. I think gold is risky. I think dollars are risky. I think any commodity that you can't protect is inherently risky, which is why I just buy and hold Bitcoin and other strong cryptocurrencies that I think have a utility. And that utility is not intrinsic. It's all useful to humans. Same thing with gold. There's no intrinsic value to gold. Jewelry, only humans really give a shit about jewelry. Electronics, only humans really care about electronics. Um, record keeping, shininess, store of value, only humans care about those things. So they're not intrinsic to the gold, they're intrinsic to humans. And I haven't heard anyone be able to argue against that. They'll tell you things, properties it has, and those properties always serve humans. There's no way around it. So when they say, oh, Trump is, he's doing these tariffs, so everybody went risk off, and the stock market and Bitcoin didn't fall. That's not what happened. People got scared and sold a bunch of Bitcoin, and some other people bought it for really cheap. That's all that happened. And it's going to go right back up because it's scarce and because it's useful to humans. So when people say something doesn't have intrinsic value, just kind of remind them nothing has intrinsic value. And when they say, oh, we're going risk on or risk off, just say whose risk. Because as long as you're not margin trading, the only risk is the underlying asset. And since Bitcoin, all of its governance is known, and most cryptocurrencies, especially like Ethereum, Solana, even something like Ripple, I think is more secure than the United States government. You can call it centralized all you want, but I think it's very much harder to change things in Ripple without consensus than it is in the United States government without consensus. Just look at all the departments they're cutting right now that just kind of grew out of nowhere. Good luck doing that on these other chains. You wouldn't get away with it. So I think inherently these chains are risk off because it makes me not want to take risk and just hold them forever. And to me, risk on would be, I'm going to risk it and put my money back in the dollars and hopefully the market falls and I can buy back in cheaper. That's a huge risk to me. I'd rather just take other people's money and put it into these non-risky things. I could see how meme coins could be kind of seen as risk-on assets, but honestly, Dogecoin's more secure than the US dollar. It's going to outlive the United States, for sure. It's based on the same properties as Bitcoin. Same thing with Litecoin. Same thing with Ethereum. They're just not going away. And they don't have these leadership problems. They are their own governments. And I think if you're saying maybe some protected treasury is risk off because there's government protection or something like that, I think that's nonsense. Bitcoin has stronger governance than the United States, which is the de facto strongest nation on earth. So if the United States can't compete with Bitcoin governance, and Bitcoin governance isn't even the best governance out there, in my opinion, who's really risk on and who's really risk off? It really just has to do with the whims of traders, and it's a nonsense term. I would like to use the term in a more logical manner, but that's not where we are right now. And so hopefully this made sense and you understood what I was talking about. And just let me know what you think.